The rain pounded against the windows of Pinewood Youth Home, a state-run facility on the outskirts of Portland, Maine. 15-year-old Ethan Parker pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching raindrops race down the pane. 3 years had passed since the car accident that took his parents, 3 years of being shuffled between foster homes and group facilities. Tonight marked 6 months at Pinewood, the longest he'd stayed anywhere since becoming a ward of the state. "Lights out in 10 minutes, called Ms. Winters, her voice echoing down the hallway with practiced authority. Ethan didn't respond. He knew the routine by heart: lights out at 9:30, morning check-in at 7 o'clock, breakfast at 7:30. Day after day, the same schedule, the same faces, the same feeling of being nowhere and belonging to no one. His roommate, Derek, was already in bed with headphones on, ignoring Ethan as usual. They'd exchanged maybe 50 words total in the months they'd shared this small space. Ethan preferred it that way. Getting close to people meant eventual disappointment when they left or sent you away. Ethan's gaze shifted to his backpack, already packed with essentials: a change of clothes, his father's pocket watch, a worn copy of The Call of the Wild, a flashlight, and the $43 he'd saved from odd jobs around the facility. He'd been planning this for weeks, calculating the perfect moment. Tonight, with the staff distracted by a plumbing issue in the East Wing and the storm providing cover, his opportunity had arrived. As the hallway lights dimmed, Ethan waited. The rain intensified, drowning out the usual nighttime sounds of the building. At 11:15, he slipped from his bed, already dressed in jeans and his heaviest sweater beneath a rain jacket. Derek didn't stir as Ethan eased the window open, thanking the maintenance worker who'd shown him how to disable the alarm during a repair last month. The drop to the ground wasn't far, just 10 feet to a grassy area partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Ethan landed with a soft thud, the wet earth cushioning his fall. For a moment, he crouched there, rain soaking through his clothes, heart pounding in his chest. He was actually doing this. He was leaving. Keeping to the shadows, Ethan made his way across the property, ducking beneath windows and avoiding the security cameras he'd mapped out during recreation time. At the perimeter fence, he found the gap he'd discovered weeks earlier where erosion had created a space just wide enough for a skinny teenager to squeeze through. Freedom felt different than he'd imagined: colder, wetter, more uncertain. But as Ethan hiked along the rural highway leading away from Pinewood, thumb occasionally extended at passing headlights, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: possibility. 3 rides and 7 hours later, Ethan found himself dropped off on the outskirts of a small coastal town called Harborview. Dawn was breaking, the rain had stopped, and his hunger was becoming impossible to ignore. His last ride, a middle-aged truck driver named Bill, had pressed a $10 bill into Ethan's hand before driving away. "There's a diner in town that opens at 6, Bill had told him. "Ask for Maggie. Tell her Bill sent you, and she'll feed you without asking too many questions." The diner, Sandy's Lighthouse Cafe, was exactly where Bill had said it would be. A bell jingled as Ethan entered, the warm aroma of coffee and bacon enveloping him. Only 2 tables were occupied: an elderly couple sharing a newspaper and a man in a fisherman's jacket typing on a laptop. "Sit anywhere, hon," called a woman from behind the counter. She was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled into a ponytail and laugh lines around her eyes. Her name tag read Maggie. Ethan slid into a booth and ordered coffee when she approached. "Bill sent me," he added quietly. Maggie's expression softened with understanding. "Any friend of Bill's is welcome here," she said, returning moments later with coffee, orange juice, and a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "On the house," she insisted when Ethan tried to pay. As he ate, Ethan overheard the fisherman mentioning seasonal work opportunities at the harbor. After finishing his meal and thanking Maggie, he followed the road signs toward the water. The town was waking up, shopkeepers opening storefronts, joggers running along the shore, fishing boats heading out to sea. At the harbor office, a weathered sign advertised day workers needed. Ethan hesitated only briefly before entering. The harbor master, a gruff man named Stan, looked skeptical of Ethan's age but didn't ask for ID. "I need someone to help clean up the maintenance shed and organize supplies," Stan said. $10 an hour, cash. You interested?" Ethan nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir." The work was straightforward but physically demanding. By late afternoon, Ethan had earned $40 and gained Stan's grudging approval. "You're a hard worker," Stan acknowledged. "Come back tomorrow if you want." With earnings in his pocket, Ethan explored Harborview, memorizing its layout and identifying potential sleeping spots. As evening approached, he followed a hiking trail on the outskirts of town, hoping to find a secluded place to spend the night. That's when he saw it, half hidden among pine trees on a wooded hillside overlooking the bay, an abandoned cabin. The structure was weathered but intact, with boarded windows and a padlocked door. A faded, "No trespassing" sign hung crookedly on a tree. Circling the cabin, Ethan discovered a partially open window at the back where the boards had come loose. Heart racing with both caution and curiosity, he peered inside. The interior was dark, but appeared empty of inhabitants. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan squeezed through the opening, flashlight in hand, unaware that what awaited him inside would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. Dust particles danced in the beam of Ethan's flashlight as he stepped cautiously into the cabin. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, and the musty scent of abandonment filled his nostrils. For several moments, he stood perfectly still, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness while listening for any indication he wasn't alone. The cabin was small but solidly built, a single room with what appeared to be a tiny bathroom off to one side. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and a thin layer of dust covered every surface. Despite its neglected state, the place retained a strange coziness. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while rough-hewn bookshelves lined another. A basic kitchenette occupied one corner, its sink crusted with mineral deposits from years of disuse. "Hello?" Ethan called softly, more out of habit than expectation. Only silence answered him. Moving deeper into the space, his flashlight beam caught something unexpected, a wooden desk against the far wall, its surface cluttered with papers, notebooks, and what looked like hand-drawn maps. Unlike everything else in the cabin, these items seemed relatively free of dust, as if someone had been there within the past few months. Curiosity overcame caution as Ethan approached the desk. The top notebook was leather-bound and weather-beaten, its pages filled with elegant, precise handwriting. Opening to a random page, Ethan read. April 17, 2023, the Conservation Board rejected my proposal again. Third time now. They claim insufficient evidence, but I know the truth. Caldwell Developments has them in their pocket. If I can't protect this land legally, I'll have to find another way. The ecosystem here is too precious to lose to another soulless resort. Ethan flipped through more pages, finding detailed observations of local wildlife, pressed plant specimens, and meticulous records of water quality samples from the bay. Whoever had written this was passionate about this land and determined to protect it from development. The map spread across the desk showed the surrounding area in remarkable detail, with certain sections highlighted and annotated. One map in particular caught Ethan's attention. It showed the cabin and the surrounding 5 miles of coastline, with red circles marking what appeared to be observation points. Scribbled notes indicated times, dates, and wildlife sightings. As he continued exploring, Ethan discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug. Heartbeat quickening, he pulled it open to reveal a small storage space containing plastic containers of emergency supplies, canned food, bottled water, first aid equipment, and battery-powered lamps. Whoever had stocked this place had prepared for extended stays. In one corner of the cabin, a narrow cot was pushed against the wall, its thin mattress covered with a sleeping bag. Above it hung several framed photographs, the only personal touches in the otherwise utilitarian space. They showed a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weather-beaten face, often accompanied by a black Labrador retriever. In several images, he stood alongside groups of students in outdoor settings, appearing to be teaching or leading field trips. The bathroom contained basic toiletries and a shower with a hand-pumped water system connected to what Ethan guessed was a rainwater collection tank on the roof. Everything was simple but thoughtfully designed for sustainable, off-grid living. By now, twilight was fading, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Ethan weighed his options. The cabin offered shelter, supplies, and privacy, everything he needed. But clearly, someone still used this place occasionally. Was it trespassing if he just stayed one night? He could leave everything exactly as he found it. Decision made, Ethan set up one of the battery lamps and organized his meager belongings. He found matches and kindling by the fireplace and carefully built a small fire, grateful for the camping skills his father had taught him years ago. As warmth gradually filled the cabin, Ethan's exhaustion caught up with him. Using his backpack as a pillow, he wrapped himself in his jacket and lay down on the cot, intending only to rest for a moment before figuring out his next steps. He awoke with a start to the sound of movement outside. Daylight streamed through cracks in the boarded windows, and his fire had burned down to embers. How long had he slept? Checking his watch, 8:17 a.m. He'd been out for hours. The noise came again, footsteps on the porch, followed by the rattle of keys in the padlock. In a panic, Ethan scrambled up, looking for somewhere to hide, but it was too late. The door swung open, and a man stood silhouetted in the doorway, the black Labrador from the photographs at his side. "I thought I might find someone here," the man said, his voice neither angry nor surprised. The harbor master mentioned a new kid in town asking questions about places to stay. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing through possible excuses and escape routes. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I just needed shelter for the night. I was going to leave everything exactly as I found it." The man studied him for a long moment, then stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door behind him. He was older than in the photographs, perhaps in his early 60s now, with gray threading through his beard and deep lines around his eyes. He wore hiking boots, cargo pants, and a flannel shirt beneath a weatherproof jacket. The dog sat obediently at his feet, watching Ethan with intelligent eyes. "You've read my journals," the man observed, nodding toward the desk where Ethan had left the notebook open. "Some of it," Ethan admitted. "You're trying to protect this land." "My name is Dr. Thomas Barrett," the man said, setting down a backpack he'd been carrying. "Most people just call me Tom. I was a marine biologist at the university until I retired early to focus on conservation work." He gestured to the dog. "This is Scout." "I'm Ethan," he replied cautiously, omitting his last name. "I was just passing through." Tom's eyes, keen and perceptive, took in Ethan's worn clothes and defensive posture. "Run away?" he asked directly. Ethan tensed, ready to bolt. "Are you going to call the police?" "That depends," Tom answered, "on why you're running and whether you're willing to tell me the truth." Silence stretched between them as Ethan weighed his options. The door was still open. He could make a run for it, but then what? Back to hitchhiking, sleeping rough, scraping by on odd jobs? And this man, Tom, didn't seem threatening. There was something in his eyes that reminded Ethan of his father, a steadiness, an integrity. "I'm from Pinewood Youth Home in Portland," Ethan finally admitted. "I'm not going back." Tom nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. He moved to the kitchenette and began pumping water into a kettle. "Hungry?" he asked, placing the kettle on a small propane stove. The question caught Ethan off guard. "A little," he confessed. While the water heated, Tom retrieved a bag of coffee, a loaf of bread, and some cheese from his backpack. He worked methodically, slicing the bread and cheese, preparing the coffee with practiced efficiency. "I come up here 3 days a week," Tom explained as he worked. "Monitoring the ecosystem, documenting changes in the wildlife patterns. This land, 500 acres from the ridge to the bay, it's the last undeveloped stretch of coastline in the county. A developer named Caldwell wants to build a luxury resort here. His voice tightened. 100-room hotel, golf course, marina. It would destroy the delicate balance of this entire ecosystem. That's why you have all the maps and journals, Ethan said. You're building a case to protect it. Tom handed him a mug of coffee and a sandwich. Smart kid. Yes, I'm gathering evidence of endangered species habitats, documenting the migratory patterns of local birds, and studying the impact of tidal patterns on the coastal vegetation. If I can prove this area is ecologically significant enough, we might be able to get it designated as a protected reserve. Ethan bit into the sandwich, realizing how hungry he actually was. But you said they've rejected your proposal 3 times. The Conservation Board, yes. But I've been building support among local environmental groups and applying for federal protection status. It's a slow process. Tom sipped his coffee, eyes drifting to the window. Meanwhile, Caldwell is pressuring the county to approve his development permits. It's a race against time. Scout had settled on a worn rug by the fireplace, watching them both with attentive eyes. Outside, birds called to each other in the morning light, and somewhere in the distance, waves crashed against the shore. So why are you telling me all this? Ethan asked. Tom studied him for a moment. Because I could use an assistant. Someone to help with field observations, data collection, camp maintenance. The university used to send graduate students, but budget cuts ended that program 2 years ago. I've been managing alone, but it's too much for one person. Ethan nearly choked on his sandwich. You're offering me a job? You don't even know me. I know you're intelligent enough to find this place and curious enough to investigate my research rather than just looking for things to steal, Tom replied. I know you're resourceful and not afraid of hard work, based on what Stan at the harbor told me about you. And I suspect you need a place to stay that's off the grid. The proposition hung in the air between them. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities and doubts. What's the catch? 3 conditions, Tom said firmly. First, you tell me the full truth about your situation. I need to know what I'm getting into. Second, you commit to at least 2 months of work. The migratory bird season is about to begin, and that's when we collect our most critical data. Third, you agree to continue your education while you're here. I have textbooks and can provide instruction in science and mathematics. For other subjects, we can find resources. You want to be my teacher? Ethan asked skeptically. I was a professor for 30 years before focusing on conservation work, Tom explained. Teaching is second nature to me. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. But understand this, if you're in real trouble, if someone's looking for you because you've committed a crime or if you're in danger, I need to know now. It's nothing like that, Ethan said quickly. I just couldn't stay in the system anymore. My parents died 3 years ago. Car accident. No close relatives willing to take me. I've been bounced between 4 foster homes and 2 group facilities since then. He stared into his coffee cup. Nobody's looking very hard for a 15-year-old nobody with no connections and no money. Tom nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. What about school? Ethan shrugged. I keep up. I was in advanced classes before everything. The group home had mandatory study hours. Books were always my escape. And your plan was, what? Work odd jobs until you turn 18? Something like that, Ethan admitted. I hadn't really thought beyond getting away. Tom stood, walking to the window where he gazed out at the pine trees swaying in the morning breeze. For several long moments, he seemed lost in thought. Finally, he turned back to Ethan. Here's what I propose, you stay here as my research assistant. I'll provide food, shelter, and education. You'll help with data collection, equipment maintenance, and documentation. We'll maintain the cabin together. In exchange, you get a safe place to stay, meaningful work, and a chance to be part of something important." He paused. "I come up Monday through Wednesday and occasionally on weekends. When I'm not here, the cabin is yours to use, responsibly. Scout usually stays with me, but he could keep you company sometimes, if you'd like." The offer seemed too good to be true. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ethan asked. Tom's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself at your age. Sometimes people need a chance, not a lecture or a handout." He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Ethan looked at the offered hand, then around at the cabin, this unexpected sanctuary that had appeared exactly when he needed it most. He thought about the alternative, continuing to run, always looking over his shoulder, never belonging anywhere. "Deal," he said, shaking Tom's hand firmly. "When do we start?" The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows as Ethan awoke, momentarily disoriented before remembering where he was. 2 weeks had passed since his agreement with Tom, and already the cabin felt more like home than anywhere he'd stayed since losing his parents. Ethan stretched and slipped out of the sleeping bag, his bare feet connecting with the cool wooden floor. He had fallen into a comfortable routine on the days Tom wasn't there: rise with the sun, boil water for coffee, review yesterday's field notes while eating breakfast, then head out for morning observations along the coastal trail. Today, however, was Monday, a school day, as Tom called it. Ethan glanced at the stack of textbooks on the desk: marine biology, environmental science, calculus, and American literature. The curriculum Tom had devised was rigorous but engaging, focusing on practical applications of theoretical concepts. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal with dried berries, Ethan opened his field journal and began organizing his weekend observations. He'd spotted a family of river otters yesterday, documenting their behaviors and location with the precision Tom had taught him. His sketches were improving too, no longer crude outlines but detailed renderings that captured essential characteristics for identification. At precisely 9 a.m., he heard the familiar sound of Tom's truck coming up the access road. Scout was the first through the door, bounding toward Ethan with enthusiastic greeting barks before settling into a sit, waiting for the customary ear scratch Ethan had learned he enjoyed. "Productive weekend?" Tom asked, setting down his backpack and a bag of groceries. "Very," Ethan replied, sliding his journal across the desk. "The otters are back in the North Cove, and I documented 3 species of migratory birds we haven't seen before." He couldn't keep the pride from his voice. "I used the field guide to identify them and cross-referenced with your previous observations." Tom's eyebrows raised as he reviewed Ethan's notes. "Impressive work," he nodded approvingly. "Your observational skills have improved significantly. And these sketches, you've got a natural talent." The praise warmed Ethan unexpectedly. He'd forgotten how it felt to have someone notice and appreciate his efforts. "Today we're focusing on marine ecology," Tom announced, pulling reference books from his bag. "I've brought water samples from different points in the bay. We'll analyze them for nitrogen levels, which could indicate pollution from upstream sources." The morning passed quickly as they worked side by side in the makeshift laboratory Tom had set up on one side of the cabin. He was a natural teacher, patient, encouraging, but also demanding. He didn't just demonstrate techniques, he explained the underlying principles, connecting each lesson to the broader context of their conservation efforts. "Why does it matter if nitrogen levels increase?" Tom asked as Ethan carefully measured chemicals into test tubes. "Excess nitrogen causes algal blooms," Ethan answered, recalling their previous lessons. "The algae depletes oxygen in the water when it decomposes, creating dead zones where fish and other marine life can't survive. And if we find elevated levels here?" Ethan considered the question. "It would strengthen our case for protection. We could prove the watershed is vulnerable to agricultural runoff from inland farms." Tom nodded, clearly pleased. "That's exactly right. Every piece of data we collect tells part of the story of this ecosystem. Our job is to make that story so compelling and scientifically sound that it can't be ignored. After lunch, sandwiches eaten on the porch overlooking the bay, they moved on to mathematics. Unlike the dry, abstract problems Ethan had encountered in school, Tom's approach was practical and engaging. Today they were calculating tidal volumes and their impact on coastal erosion, using real measurements from their observation points. Mathematics is the language of nature, Tom explained as they worked through complex equations. When you understand the mathematics of a system, you can predict how it will respond to changes, whether those changes are natural or man-made. By late afternoon, they had shifted to literature, discussing Thoreau's Walden and its reflections on humanity's relationship with the natural world. Tom had an impressive library stored in weatherproof containers beneath the cabin's floorboards: classic literature, scientific texts, philosophy, and history. Education isn't about memorizing facts, Tom said as their discussion concluded. It's about learning to think critically, to question assumptions, and to see connections between seemingly unrelated things. The natural world is the greatest teacher of all, if we pay attention. As evening approached, they prepared dinner together, a simple but satisfying stew made with vegetables from Tom's garden at his house in town. The rhythm of their days had become familiar, almost comfortable, though Ethan still maintained a certain guardedness, a habit developed over years of impermanence. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Tom broke their companionable silence. "There's something I've been meaning to show you," he said, retrieving a metal box from beneath a loose floorboard. "I think you're ready for this." Inside the box was a collection of legal documents, letters, and photographs. Tom spread them across the table, organizing them chronologically. "This is the history of my fight for this land," he explained. "It started 20 years ago when I first discovered this area during a research expedition. I recognized immediately how special it was, an intact coastal ecosystem relatively untouched by development." He pointed to a faded photograph showing a younger version of himself standing with a woman beside the cabin, which looked considerably more dilapidated. "My wife, Eleanor, and I purchased this cabin and the surrounding 20 acres with our savings," he continued. "Over the years, we acquired more parcels as they became available, piecing together what we could afford on professors' salaries." Ethan studied the photograph, noting the woman's bright smile and the way she leaned slightly into Tom. "Where is she now?" he asked cautiously. Tom's expression softened with old grief. "Cancer took her 8 years ago. She was the heart of this project, the one who kept me fighting when rejections piled up and funding disappeared." He tapped another document. "This conservation trust was established in her name. The land legally belongs to the trust now, with me as the primary steward." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, understanding loss in a way few his age did. Tom nodded in acknowledgement. "She would have liked you," he said simply. "Eleanor always believed in giving people second chances." He gathered the documents, returning them to the box. "I'm showing you this because I want you to understand what we're fighting for. This isn't just about saving trees and birds. It's about preserving a legacy, keeping a promise." As the fire crackled in comfortable silence, Ethan felt the weight of that trust settle upon him, not as a burden, but as a privilege. For the first time in years, he was part of something larger than himself, something that mattered. 1 month into his stay at the cabin, Ethan was kneeling by a tidal pool, carefully documenting the variety of marine organisms thriving in this microecosystem. The morning fog was burning off, revealing a brilliant blue May sky. Scout lay nearby on a sun-warmed rock, occasionally lifting his head to track seagulls wheeling overhead. The sound of a boat engine disrupted the peaceful scene. Ethan glanced up to see a sleek yacht approaching the shoreline, too close for comfort. Quickly packing his notebook and collection vials into his backpack, he whistled for Scout and retreated to the tree line, where he could observe without being immediately visible. The yacht anchored in the small cove, and a motorized dinghy was lowered. 3 men boarded it and headed for shore. As they approached, Ethan could see that two were dressed in expensive outdoor wear that looked brand new, while the third wore what appeared to be a park ranger's uniform. "Stay," Ethan whispered to Scout, who had tensed beside him. The dog obeyed but remained alert, hackles slightly raised. From his concealed position, Ethan could hear snippets of conversation as the men walked the shoreline, occasionally stopping to consult a map and take photographs. "Perfect location for the marina," said one man, gesturing broadly across the cove. "Environmental assessment is just a formality," replied the taller man, who seemed to be in charge. "Locals won't put up much resistance once they see the tax revenue and job projections," added the man in the ranger uniform. Ethan's stomach tightened. These had to be representatives from Caldwell Developments, the company Tom had mentioned was trying to build the resort. And if he wasn't mistaken, they had somehow gained the support of someone from within the Park Service, the very people who should be protecting this land. Taking care to remain hidden, Ethan followed at a distance as the men hiked up from the beach toward the ridge that overlooked the bay. They stopped periodically to mark locations with small flags and take more photographs. When they approached within a quarter-mile of the cabin, Ethan grew anxious. Though Tom had assured him the cabin's existence was legal, grandfathered in before certain zoning regulations, he wasn't sure how these men would react to finding someone living here. After about an hour, the men returned to their dinghy and headed back to the yacht. Ethan waited until the vessel disappeared around the headland before emerging from his hiding place, Scout bounding ahead to investigate the unfamiliar scents left behind. Immediately, Ethan pulled out his phone, one of the few modern conveniences Tom had insisted he keep, programmed with Tom's number and emergency contacts. Though signal was spotty in this area, he managed to get enough bars to send a text, "Visitors from Caldwell at the Cove." 3 men, taking photos, marking locations. 1 wearing ranger uniform. Tom's response came several minutes later, "Document everything. Don't confront. Be at road access at 2 p.m. Bringing someone you should meet." Following Tom's instructions, Ethan returned to the areas the men had visited. He photographed their marker flags, took notes on their locations, and collected one that had been left behind, which bore the Caldwell Developments logo. By early afternoon, he had compiled a detailed record of the visitors' activities, including sketches of their survey pattern and notes on their conversation fragments. At the appointed time, Ethan hiked to the access road where Tom's truck was already waiting. Beside him stood a woman Ethan didn't recognize, tall, with short gray hair and an air of no-nonsense authority. She wore hiking boots, cargo pants, and a shirt with the logo of a local environmental organization. "Ethan, this is Martha Reynolds," Tom introduced them. "Environmental attorney and an old friend. Martha, this is my research assistant I told you about." Martha offered a firm handshake and a penetrating gaze that made Ethan feel she was assessing everything about him in seconds. "Tom speaks highly of your work," she said. "He tells me you had some unwelcome visitors today." As they walked back to the cabin, Ethan recounted everything he had observed and overheard. Martha asked precise questions about the men's activities, particularly interested in the presence of someone in a ranger's uniform. "That's troubling," she said when Ethan finished his account. "If Caldwell has someone inside the Park Service, it could explain why our previous conservation proposals were rejected so quickly." At the cabin, Ethan showed them the marker flag he'd collected and his documentation of the visit. Tom and Martha studied his notes with grave expressions. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," Tom said. "The preliminary hearing isn't scheduled until next month, but they're already mapping development zones." Martha nodded grimly. "And bringing potential investors to see the property, based on what Ethan overheard. We need to accelerate our timeline." She turned to Ethan. "Your observations today are extremely valuable. Would you be willing to provide a written statement of what you witnessed? It could be important evidence if we need to file for an emergency injunction." Of course, Ethan agreed, though the request made him uneasy. A formal statement meant potential exposure, something he'd been carefully avoiding. Tom seemed to sense his hesitation. Your statement would only include what you observed today, he assured him. No personal information required beyond your first name and role as a research assistant. Relieved, Ethan nodded. I'll write it up right away. While Ethan worked on his statement, Tom and Martha spread maps across the table, speaking in low, urgent tones about legal strategies and community organizing efforts. Phrases like public comment period, environmental impact study, and jurisdictional challenge filtered through their conversation. What can I do to help? Ethan asked when he'd finished his statement and handed it to Martha. The attorney studied him thoughtfully. Continue your field documentation. Evidence of endangered species habitats is our strongest legal argument against development. But now we'll need to be more cautious. If they're surveying the area regularly, they might notice signs of your research activities. We should move your observation points, Tom agreed. And vary your schedule. No patterns they could detect. Martha checked her watch. I need to get back to town. There's a community meeting tonight about the development proposal. Several local business owners are planning to speak in favor of it. She gathered her papers into a briefcase. Tom, you should come. Your scientific perspective would be valuable. Tom hesitated, glancing at Ethan. I don't like leaving you alone, especially now that we know they're actively surveying the area. I'll be fine, Ethan insisted. I can stay inside, keep a low profile. After some discussion, it was decided. Tom would attend the meeting with Martha while Ethan remained at the cabin, doors locked, staying out of sight. They would return first thing in the morning with supplies and updates. As twilight descended and Ethan watched Tom's truck disappear down the access road, Scout remaining behind for company, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. The isolated sanctuary of the cabin suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. Something told him the peaceful routine of the past month was about to change dramatically. Darkness fell over the cabin as Ethan finished washing his dinner dishes. He had kept the lights minimal, just a single lamp in the main room, to avoid drawing attention to his presence. Scout lay by the door, occasionally lifting his head to listen to the night sounds outside. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then building to a steady downpour that drummed against the roof and obscured the view through the windows. Ethan welcomed the weather. It decreased the likelihood of any nighttime visitors. He had spent the evening reviewing his research notes, looking for patterns in the wildlife observations that might strengthen their case for conservation. The work absorbed him completely, and it wasn't until Scout suddenly stood, ears perked and a low growl building in his throat, that Ethan realized something was wrong. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, moving to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could make out nothing unusual, just darkness and the shadowy outlines of trees swaying in the wind. Scout's growl deepened, his attention fixed on the door. Ethan's heart rate accelerated as he heard what had alerted the dog, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch, too deliberate to be an animal. Quickly, Ethan extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. He moved silently to the desk, where Tom had shown him a loaded flare gun was kept for emergencies. His fingers closed around the plastic handle just as a knock sounded at the door. Scout barked sharply, positioning himself between Ethan and the entrance. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I need help." A woman's voice, strained with urgency, called through the door. Ethan hesitated. Tom had been explicit in his instructions: no visitors, no exceptions, especially after today's encounter with the Caldwell representatives. "Please. My car went off the access road. I'm soaked and lost." The voice sounded genuinely distressed. Against his better judgment, Ethan approached the door, flare gun concealed behind his back. "Who are you?" he called through the wood. "My name is Alexis Caldwell. I was trying to find the ranger station to get back to town. Please, I just need to use a phone." The name Caldwell sent a jolt of alarm through Ethan. This couldn't be coincidence. "There's no phone here," he replied cautiously. The ranger station is 5 miles north. Follow the main road. I can't see the road in this downpour. Please, I just need shelter until this passes. I'm freezing. Ethan's mind raced. If this woman was connected to Caldwell Developments, letting her inside could compromise everything. But if she was genuinely in trouble and he turned her away, what did that make him? I have a dog, he warned. He's not friendly to strangers. I love dogs, the voice responded immediately. Please, I'm absolutely drenched. Making a decision he hoped wouldn't prove disastrous, Ethan commanded Scout to stay, positioned himself strategically, and unbolted the door, opening it just enough to see outside. A woman in her late 20s stood on the porch, rain dripping from her expensive hiking jacket and dark hair plastered to her face. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something polished about her, manicured nails, designer outdoor wear, an air of someone unaccustomed to discomfort. Oh, thank God, she breathed, visibly relieved. I thought I was going to have to spend the night in the woods. Scout continued to growl softly, unconvinced by her apparent distress. Your dog seems protective, she observed, remaining on the porch. He is, Ethan confirmed, not moving to invite her in. You said your name is Caldwell? Any relation to Caldwell Developments? Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. My father is Richard Caldwell, the CEO, she admitted. How do you know about Caldwell Developments all the way out here? Ethan chose his words carefully. News travels. Your company's plans for this area are public knowledge. Alexis sighed, pushing wet hair from her face. Look, I'm not here on company business. I was hiking, trying to clear my head, and got caught in the storm. My car slid off the road back there. She gestured vaguely behind her. Can I please come in? Just until the rain lets up. Against every instinct, Ethan stepped back, allowing her entry. Scout maintained his vigilant stance, eyes never leaving the stranger. Thank you, she said, removing her dripping jacket. I didn't expect to find anyone living out here. The area surveys didn't mention occupied structures. Surveys? Ethan echoed, pretending ignorance while noting her slip. Environmental surveys, she clarified quickly. For the conservation assessment. I work with the environmental compliance team for my father's company. The cabin's interior, with its maps, research materials, and field equipment, clearly told the story of its purpose. Alexis took it all in with sharp, assessing eyes. You're part of the conservation study group, she stated rather than asked. The one opposing the resort development. Ethan didn't confirm or deny, instead asking, is there someone you want to call? I don't have a landline, but I might be able to get enough signal on my cell for a text. Alexis shook her head. No need. My father knows the area where I was hiking. If I don't return by morning, he'll send someone looking. She continued to scan the cabin, her gaze lingering on Tom's research journals. This is quite an operation you have here. Very thorough. Something in her tone made Ethan uneasy. He moved casually to place himself between her and the desk where their most recent findings were documented. So you're alone out here? She asked, rubbing her arms for warmth. No, Ethan lied smoothly. My colleagues are due back any minute. They went to check on trail conditions. Alexis nodded, though her expression suggested she didn't believe him. Do you mind if I warm up by the fire before heading back out? Once the rain eases a bit? Reluctantly, Ethan gestured to the fireplace. As she moved toward it, Scout followed, maintaining his guard. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. Ethan remained standing, alert, wondering what Tom would do in this situation and how this unexpected encounter might affect their fight to protect the land. Outside, the storm intensified, seemingly trapping them together in this isolated cabin. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm, the one that threatened everything he and Tom had worked for, was just beginning. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Ethan stirred awake in the chair where he'd spent the night, unwilling to fully sleep with Alexis Caldwell under the same roof. She had taken the cot, while Scout maintained his vigilant position on the floor between them. The rain had stopped, but low-hanging clouds suggested more was on the way. Ethan checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. Tom should be arriving soon. You didn't sleep much, Alexis observed, sitting up on the cot. Despite the uncomfortable accommodations, she looked remarkably put together. Your dog didn't take his eyes off me all night. He's protective, Ethan replied simply, moving to the kitchenette to start coffee. The rain stopped. You should be able to make it back to your car now. Alexis joined him at the small counter, studying the topographical maps pinned to the nearby wall. These are impressive. You've documented every stream, wetland, and habitat zone in the area. Her finger traced a red-marked section. Including the nesting grounds of the coastal spotted owl, a species I believe is under consideration for endangered status. Ethan tensed. She knew too much about their research for comfort. Coffee, he offered, deflecting. Please. She accepted the mug he handed her. You know, my father isn't the environmental villain you probably think he is. The resort plan includes significant conservation areas and sustainable building practices. A sustainable luxury resort is still a resort, Ethan countered. The ecosystem here is fragile. Even limited development would disrupt wildlife corridors and threaten water quality in the bay. Alexis sipped her coffee, regarding him with newfound interest. You speak like a scientist, not just a research assistant. How long have you been working with Dr. Barrett? The direct mention of Tom's name startled Ethan. How do you know about Thomas Barrett? She smiled slightly. Everyone involved in this project knows about him. The retired marine biologist who's been the thorn in Caldwell Development's side for years. Brilliant scientist, stubborn conservationist, and apparently now employing very young research assistants. Her gaze sharpened. Who exactly are you, Ethan? You seem a bit young for a graduate student. Before Ethan could formulate a response, the sound of a vehicle approaching saved him from answering. Scout barked once, recognizing the familiar engine noise of Tom's truck. Sounds like your colleagues are back, Alexis noted, setting down her coffee cup and reaching for her now-dried jacket. Moments later, the door opened to reveal Tom, with Martha close behind him. Both froze at the sight of Alexis Caldwell standing in the cabin. Ms. Caldwell, Tom said after a moment of stunned silence. This is unexpected. Dr. Barrett, Alexis acknowledged with a nod. It seems I got caught in the storm last night and your assistant was kind enough to offer shelter. Martha stepped forward, her attorney's instincts clearly engaged. Alexis Caldwell. Environmental Compliance Director for Caldwell Developments and daughter of Richard Caldwell. What a coincidence that you happened to get stranded at this particular cabin. Alexis met Martha's suspicious gaze evenly. Not entirely coincidence. I was hiking the area, familiarizing myself with the terrain our surveys have been documenting. The storm was unexpected, as was finding someone living out here. Her eyes returned to Tom. Your conservation efforts are more hands-on than we realized. We have the proper permits for our research, Tom stated firmly. This structure existed before current zoning regulations and is grandfathered in as a field station. I'm not disputing that, Alexis replied. In fact, I found my night here quite educational. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan moved closer to Tom, feeling both protective and in need of protection. I should be going, Alexis continued, gathering her few belongings. My father will be wondering where I am. I'll walk you to your car, Martha offered, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't optional. We can discuss the interesting coincidence of your presence here. As the two women left, Tom turned to Ethan with concerned eyes. "Are you all right? What happened?" Ethan quickly recounted the events of the previous evening, Alexis's arrival, her interest in their research, the questions she'd asked. "I didn't tell her anything important," he assured Tom. "But she already knew a lot about our work." Tom nodded grimly. "They've been investigating us more thoroughly than we realized." He began checking the research materials scattered around the cabin. "Did she touch anything? Take pictures?" "No, Scout wouldn't let her move around much. He stayed between her and our documents all night." Tom scratched the dog's ears gratefully. "Good boy." He sighed heavily. "This complicates things. If Richard Caldwell knows we have an active research station here, he might accelerate his development timeline or find ways to challenge our permits." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, feeling responsible. "I shouldn't have let her in." "You couldn't leave her in a storm," Tom reassured him. "You did the right thing, morally speaking. And maybe—" He paused, considering something. "Maybe this unexpected meeting will work to our advantage." Before Ethan could ask what he meant, Martha returned, her expression thoughtful rather than worried. "She claims her car actually did slide off the road," Martha reported. "Whether that's true or she used it as an excuse to investigate this place, I can't say for certain." "What was your impression of her?" Tom asked. Martha considered the question carefully. "She's smart, observant, and definitely her father's daughter in terms of business acumen. But—" She hesitated. "I don't think she's entirely comfortable with the resort project." She asked some pointed questions about our conservation data that suggested genuine environmental concern. "You think she might be sympathetic to our cause?" Tom asked skeptically. "I think she's conflicted," Martha clarified. "Torn between family loyalty and professional integrity. That could be useful." Tom moved to the window, watching as a sleek sedan, presumably Alexis's recovered vehicle, disappeared down the access road. "We need to accelerate our documentation efforts," he decided. "If Caldwell knows what we're doing, we need to complete our endangered species survey before they can challenge our presence here." "What about me?" Ethan asked. "She seemed suspicious about who I am." Tom and Martha exchanged glances. "It might be best if you stay out of sight when anyone from Caldwell is around," Martha suggested. "Continue your research, but be more cautious about when and where you conduct observations." Meanwhile, Tom added, "I'm going to reach out to some colleagues at the university. We need more official support, academic credibility to counter any attempts to discredit our work." As they discussed strategy for the coming days, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Alexis Caldwell's appearance had changed everything. The peaceful routine of research and learning was giving way to something that felt more like a covert operation. But instead of fear, he felt a growing determination. This land, this cause, had given him purpose when he had none. He wouldn't let it be destroyed without a fight. That evening, as Ethan updated his field journal with the day's observations, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We should talk. What you're doing matters. AC." Ethan stared at the message in disbelief before showing it to Tom. Their unexpected visitor had just become an unexpected ally. 3 weeks had passed since Alexis's unexpected arrival at the cabin, and everything had changed. The county zoning board hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning, the culmination of months of preparation and years of Tom's conservation work. Ethan sat on the cabin porch, organizing their final presentation materials while Tom paced nearby, rehearsing his testimony. Scout dozed in a patch of late afternoon sunshine, seemingly unaffected by the tension surrounding him. "The spotted owl nesting documentation is our strongest evidence," Tom muttered, reviewing their photographs and field notes. "Combined with the water quality data showing the interconnectedness of the watershed. And the economic impact analysis Martha prepared," Ethan added, holding up a professionally bound report. It shows that sustainable ecotourism would generate more long-term revenue for the community than a resort that's only accessible to wealthy visitors. Tom nodded approvingly. You've really grasped the big picture here, Ethan. This isn't just about saving plants and animals, it's about what kind of future we want for this community. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Moments later, Martha's car came into view, followed by a smaller vehicle they now recognized as Alexis's sedan. Their unlikely alliance with Richard Caldwell's daughter had proven instrumental in the past weeks. True to her text message, Alexis had met with them secretly, bringing internal documents that revealed flaws in Caldwell's environmental impact statements and evidence that the company had influenced previous conservation board decisions through political donations. I grew up watching my father build his business, she had explained during their first clandestine meeting at Martha's office. I admired him, wanted to follow in his footsteps. That's why I got my environmental science degree, to help the company grow responsibly. But this project. She had gestured to the doctored environmental reports. This isn't responsible development. It's environmental destruction disguised as progress. Her insider information, combined with their scientific documentation, had transformed their case from a passionate plea for conservation to a compelling legal and economic argument against the resort development. As Martha and Alexis approached the cabin now, both women looked tense but determined. We have news, Martha announced without preamble. Richard Caldwell has hired 3 expert witnesses to testify tomorrow, a marine biologist, an economist, and a former EPA official. They're prepared to challenge every aspect of our evidence. That's not surprising, Tom replied. Richard has deep pockets and powerful connections. What is surprising, Alexis added, is that he's also filed a complaint questioning the legal status of this cabin and your permits to conduct research here. Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Can he do that? The night before the hearing? It's a delay tactic, Martha explained. He's hoping to get the hearing postponed while the permit issue is investigated, giving him time to further undermine our case. There's more, Alexis said, her expression grim. My father received an anonymous tip about Ethan. He knows you're underage and suspects you're a runaway. He's prepared to raise this issue at the hearing if necessary, questioning the credibility of any research you've been involved with. The cabin fell silent as the implications sank in. Ethan's past, which he'd been so careful to keep separate from this new life, was about to collide with everything they'd worked for. We need to pull Ethan from the witness list, Martha decided. His testimony isn't worth the risk of exposing him to potential legal issues. No, Ethan protested. I've been documenting these habitats for months. My field notes are critical evidence. We can enter your notes and photographs as evidence without you testifying in person, Tom suggested, though he looked troubled. There's another option, Alexis said quietly. All eyes turned to her. I can testify. The proposal hung in the air, momentarily stunning everyone. You would publicly oppose your father? Martha asked, breaking the silence. Alexis nodded, her resolve evident. I've been collecting evidence of environmental compliance violations for months. If I present this information as an expert witness, as Caldwell's own environmental compliance director, it would be difficult to dismiss. Your father would never forgive you, Tom warned. Perhaps not, Alexis acknowledged, a flicker of pain crossing her face. But I wouldn't forgive myself if I stayed silent. Sometimes you have to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right. Her words resonated deeply with Ethan, who had found a new kind of family in this unexpected place, bound not by blood but by shared purpose and mutual respect. The next morning, Ethan watched from the back of the crowded county meeting room as Tom delivered passionate, scientifically rigorous testimony about the ecological value of the land. Martha followed with a compelling legal argument about the precedents for conservation designation, supported by letters from prominent environmental organizations and local businesses that favored sustainable development over luxury resorts. When Alexis was called to testify, a murmur rippled through the room. Richard Caldwell, seated with his attorneys in the front row, visibly stiffened as his daughter took the stand and methodically presented evidence of shortcuts and misrepresentations in Caldwell Development's environmental impact statements. As Environmental Compliance Director for Caldwell Developments, she concluded, her voice steady despite her father's glare, "I cannot in good conscience support this project as currently proposed. The environmental costs are too high, the mitigation measures insufficient, and the long-term impact on this unique ecosystem would be irreversible." The hearing lasted nearly 6 hours, with expert witnesses from both sides presenting conflicting projections and interpretations. Through it all, Ethan remained in the background, watching the process unfold, a process that had begun the moment he climbed through the window of an abandoned cabin, seeking merely shelter but finding so much more. When the zoning board finally voted 4-1 to designate the area as a conservation zone, prohibiting large-scale development, the room erupted in cheers from local environmental groups and concerned citizens who had rallied to their cause. Outside the county building, as reporters gathered around Tom, Martha, and a subdued Alexis, Ethan hung back, content to remain anonymous in this public victory. Tom caught his eye across the crowd and gave him a subtle nod, an acknowledgement of his contribution, his importance to the outcome. Later, as they celebrated privately at the cabin with a simple dinner, Tom raised his water glass in a toast. "To Eleanor's dream," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to new beginnings." Martha and Alexis echoed the sentiment, but Tom's eyes were on Ethan as he added, "Some people spend their whole lives searching for purpose. You found yours by climbing through a window." Ethan smiled, thinking of how far he had come from that rainy night when he first discovered this place. The cabin was no longer just a shelter from the storm, but a home. The research was no longer just a job, but a calling. And these people were no longer strangers, but the family he had thought lost forever. "To new beginnings," he agreed, raising his glass to meet the others. Outside, the sun was setting over the bay, painting the protected land in golden light. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, guardians of this special place and of each other. If you've made it this far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave us a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating content like this. Thank you for being here with us.